In our modern world, one of the most elusive and yet most essential cognitive states is focus. More than ever, we are confronted with endless notifications, shifting priorities, and a culture that often confuses busyness with productivity. But true productivity, especially the kind that allows for deep, high-level thinking and creativity, requires sustained, focused work. The question then is, how long should we work in a focused state to optimize both output and neurological health? To answer that, we need to begin by looking at the structure of attention and the rhythms of the brain. Focus is not just a mental decision, it's a neurobiological process. It involves coordinated action between multiple brain areas, including the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and deeper structures like the basal forebrain and the locus coeruleus. These structures interact via neuromodulators, particularly acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. When you sit down to perform a cognitively demanding task, be it writing, coding, problem solving, or creative planning, your brain begins to enter a mode of sustained effort through these chemicals, and crucially, the availability of these chemicals is limited in time and needs to be replenished. Research across neuroscience and behavioral psychology points to an optimal window of focused cognitive effort that lasts somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. This window is not arbitrary. It maps closely onto what's known as an ultradian rhythm. Ultradian rhythms are cycles in your physiology that repeat multiple times throughout the day, typically every 90 minutes. During each of these cycles, your body and brain go through predictable phases of alertness and fatigue. The first phase, roughly the first 90 minutes, is a peak time for concentrated mental effort. After that, your system begins to fatigue, and continuing to push beyond that window tends to produce diminishing returns. So, for focused work, aiming to operate within these 90-minute ultradian cycles is ideal. During this time, the brain is capable of increased production of norepinephrine and acetylcholine, key players in driving attention and encoding information. What's interesting is that the more you can eliminate distractions during this window, the greater the amplitude of these neurochemical signals. This is not a trivial point. When you check your phone, switch tasks, or allow your attention to fragment during this 90-minute block, you are not just wasting time. You are disrupting a finely tuned chemical orchestra that's responsible for locking in deep work. Now, not everyone has a 90-minute window available in their daily schedule, and that's understandable, but even shorter sessions, say 45 to 60 minutes, can be profoundly effective if approached with intention and structure. The key variable is not only duration but intensity and the absence of distraction. When you're immersed in deep work, the thalamus acts like a gatekeeper, allowing only goal-relevant information to enter conscious awareness. This gatekeeping function can be overridden if you switch contexts frequently. Every notification, every new browser tab is a micro-switch that cues your brain to reallocate resources. The cost of that switch is high, both in terms of cognitive energy and time. It takes approximately 23 minutes to fully re-enter the flow state after a distraction. Multiply that by just a few distractions per hour, and you begin to see why many people feel exhausted without having accomplished much. Interestingly, the state of focus is also tied to our perception of time. When deeply engaged in a task, we lose track of time, a phenomenon often referred to as time dilation. This occurs because the brain's default mode network, associated with mind, wandering, and self-referential thoughts goes offline, while the task, positive network takes over. This is the neurobiological basis of flow. But it doesn't happen on demand. It requires the right cocktail of neuromodulators and uninterrupted time. Typically, this state emerges around 20 to 30 minutes into a task, so if you only ever work in 15-minute intervals, you never actually arrive at the state of maximal cognitive performance. The practical takeaway is this: design your workday around blocks of 90 minutes for focused effort, separated by 10 to 30 minutes of deliberate rest. During the rest period, you are not checking emails or engaging with more cognitive tasks. You are resetting the system. This rest can involve something as simple as walking, staring out a window, or engaging in non-taxing movement like stretching or yoga nidra. These activities facilitate the replenishment of neuromodulators and allow your nervous system to return to a baseline level of alertness. It's also important to note that the brain's ability to sustain deep focus is not constant throughout the day. Most people experience a peak in cognitive alertness in the first few hours after waking, roughly 1 to 3 hours post-wake. This is when cortisol levels are naturally elevated and body temperature starts to rise. This period is optimal for engaging in work that requires heavy mental lifting. A second, smaller peak often occurs in the late afternoon. These windows of heightened alertness should be protected for deep work, while less cognitively demanding tasks, like administrative work or meetings, can be scheduled in the lower alertness periods. Another variable to consider is your sleep-wake cycle. Sleep quality directly affects the neuromodulatory systems that govern attention and focus. Poor sleep impairs the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate attention, reduces dopamine sensitivity, and shortens attention span. If you're trying to perform focused work without adequate sleep, you're essentially running a complex algorithm on faulty hardware. The result is slower processing, reduced creativity, and a tendency to seek stimulation through distractions. Moreover, focused work is not just a top-down process where the mind commands attention. It's deeply embodied. Physical posture, visual anchoring, and respiration all influence cognitive focus. Fixating your gaze on a narrow visual target, like a paragraph of text or a single line of code, sends signals to the brainstem that narrow internal focus. Breathing in a calm, even pattern, especially through the nose, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing internal noise. These bottom-up mechanisms can be leveraged to prepare the system for deep work. In fact, one of the most effective ways to induce a state of readiness is to engage in a short protocol of visual and breathing exercises before a work session. Just 60 seconds of deliberate stillness with narrowed gaze and slow breathing can shift the nervous system into a state of high alert, low anxiety, perfect for focused cognitive performance. Caffeine is another factor that plays a dual role in focused work. Used strategically, it can enhance alertness and delay mental fatigue by blocking adenosine receptors. However, timing and dosage are critical. Consuming caffeine within 60 to 90 minutes of waking and not too late in the day helps to support natural circadian rhythms. And while caffeine can give the perception of focus, it doesn't create the deep neurochemical cocktail required for true sustained attention unless paired with intentional behavior and structure. In terms of environment, the brain thrives on pattern and predictability when it comes to focus. If you train your system to expect deep work at a particular time and place, it begins to allocate resources in anticipation. This is classical conditioning at the neurobiological level. If you always sit in the same chair with the same lighting and begin your work with the same short routine, the brain learns to shift into work mode more quickly. This is especially powerful for individuals who struggle with procrastination or attention disorders. The environment becomes a cue, not a challenge. There is also an emotional component to focused work. Motivation and emotional salience play a large role in how long and how deeply we can concentrate. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward prediction, is released not only when we achieve a goal, but when we anticipate a meaningful outcome. When the task you're working on is tied to a personally relevant goal, something that matters to you, your brain is more likely to allocate the resources needed for sustained focus. This is why clarity of purpose and vision are not just philosophical ideas. They are biologically necessary for high performance. When you finish a 90-minute session of focused work, the brain enters a state of consolidation. This is where new information is integrated and learning is solidified. If you immediately jump into another cognitively demanding task, you interrupt this process. So part of optimizing focus is learning how to step away deliberately. Letting the mind wander, engaging in light movement, or simply closing your eyes and doing nothing for 5 minutes helps to reinforce the neural circuits you've just activated. Over time, this practice not only makes focused work more productive but more enjoyable because it aligns with the brain's natural rhythms. It's important to emphasize that focus is a skill, and like any skill, it's trainable. You can extend your ability to concentrate by gradually increasing the duration of your work blocks, but this must be done with care. Trying to force yourself into 4-hour deep work marathons on day one is likely to lead to frustration and fatigue. Begin with 45 minutes, then move to 60, then 90. Track your energy, track your clarity, adjust accordingly. This adaptive approach ensures you're building the neural circuits necessary for sustained performance without overwhelming the system. Finally, focused work is not merely about doing more, it's about doing what matters better. It's not about hustle for hustle's sake. It's about respecting the architecture of the brain and leveraging it to create meaningful, high-impact outcomes. Whether you're writing a book, solving a complex equation, or building a business, the quality of your attention determines the quality of your output. Focus is the currency of achievement. It is finite, it is precious, and it is powerful if you know how to use it. The ability to engage in deep, focused work is what separates high performers from average ones across nearly every domain: academic, professional, creative, even athletic. Yet many people assume that focus is simply about willpower, about forcing the mind to pay attention through sheer effort. In reality, sustained attention is more about structure, neurochemistry, and behavioral consistency than brute strength. Focused work is not something you should fight your way into. It's a system you should learn how to build, maintain, and protect. One of the most powerful elements in this system is what we might call cognitive warm-up. Just as athletes stretch and prime their bodies before competition, cognitive performance benefits immensely from a pre-work ritual that signals to the brain it's time to engage. This can be as simple as setting a timer, closing your tabs, putting your phone in another room, dimming the light slightly, and taking a few deep, deliberate breaths. The key is consistency. When you perform the same sequence of behaviors before a focused work session, your nervous system begins to associate those behaviors with heightened mental engagement. Over time, this primes the release of the necessary neuromodulators and reduces the friction in getting started. Another misunderstood aspect of focus is that it requires not just cognitive resources, but emotional regulation. Many people struggle to focus not because they lack intelligence or discipline, but because the task at hand is emotionally loaded. There may be anxiety about performance, fear of failure, or internalized pressure to succeed. These emotional responses activate limbic circuits that hijack the attentional systems, making it extremely difficult to settle into the calm, deliberate state required for productive work. One of the most effective tools to manage this is what psychologists refer to as cognitive reappraisal, changing the way you think about the task. Instead of viewing it as something daunting or high stakes, you reframe it as an experiment, a training session, or simply the next step in a longer journey. This reduces emotional reactivity and frees up cognitive resources for the task itself. The role of internal self-talk is also critical here. Negative internal dialogue during focused work, statements like "this is too hard" or "I'm not good at this," creates a stress response that draws attention away from the task. On the other hand, supportive, process-oriented self-talk, like "I'm making progress," or "let's see what I can figure out next," enhances persistence and increases dopamine release, even in the absence of external rewards. This dopamine provides a sense of pleasure in the effort itself, reinforcing the behavior and making it more likely that you'll return to focused work again. Another layer that significantly influences focus is the timing and quality of your nutrition. The brain is a high-energy organ, using up to 20% of the body's glucose supply. Stable blood sugar levels are essential for maintaining mental energy and clarity. Consuming a balanced meal with a low glycemic index before a deep work session can provide steady fuel without the crash that comes from sugar-laden snacks or caffeine overload. Furthermore, specific nutrients like choline found in eggs and lean meats, tyrosine found in dairy, poultry, and soy, and omega-3 fatty acids abundant in fatty fish support the production of neurotransmitters critical for focus and mood regulation. This doesn't mean you need a perfect diet to focus, but rather that mindful eating supports your brain's natural capacity to engage deeply. The role of movement and physical exercise cannot be overstated either. Regular aerobic exercise, especially done early in the day, boosts levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, a protein that enhances synaptic plasticity and supports learning. It also increases dopamine and serotonin availability, both of which help stabilize mood and sharpen focus. You don't need a full workout before every work session, but even 5 to 10 minutes of brisk walking, jumping jacks, or light stretching can significantly increase alertness and readiness. Movement is a signal to the brain that something important is about to happen. It's a primal link between motion and motivation that can be used strategically to get into the zone. A recurring challenge people face is the guilt or restlessness that comes with stepping away from work. But here's what the neuroscience shows: rest is not a break from productivity, it's a fundamental part of it. During rest periods, especially when done in a low-stimulus environment, the brain engages in background processing and systems consolidation. This is when abstract connections form, problems are reorganized, and ideas begin to crystallize. In fact, many breakthroughs and insights occur not during focused work, but in the quiet moments afterward. So learning to value rest as part of the creative and cognitive cycle is essential. Whether it's a 10-minute walk, a mindfulness session, or simply lying down and closing your eyes, rest enables the recovery of attention and replenishment of cognitive energy. The use of external tools like music or ambient sound can be helpful for focus, but they should be used intentionally. Research indicates that certain types of sounds, like binaural beats in the bay, the frequency range, or low-level white noise, can enhance concentration by masking distracting stimuli and promoting rhythmic brain activity. However, lyrics, fast tempos, or highly emotional music can do the opposite, especially for tasks involving language or deep analysis. The key is to experiment and observe. If a soundscape helps you enter a focused state more easily, it can become part of your toolkit. If it becomes a source of distraction, it should be eliminated. It's also worth discussing how multitasking impacts focus. The human brain is not designed for true multitasking. What we call multitasking is actually task switching, and it carries a heavy toll on mental performance. Every switch between tasks introduces a switch cost, both in time and in neural efficiency. You lose momentum, introduce more errors, and fatigue your attentional systems faster. So the best approach is to single, task with intensity. Focus on one thing with full attention, complete it or reach a meaningful stopping point, then shift. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most high-leverage habits you can adopt in a distracted world. Over time, your capacity for focus becomes a function of how often you engage in it. Just like lifting weights builds muscle, doing focused work strengthens the neural circuits responsible for sustained attention. These include the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the parietal cortex, regions responsible for directing and maintaining attention. Through repeated, deliberate practice, you actually change the physical structure of your brain, a process known as experience-dependent plasticity. This means that even if you struggle with focus now, consistent application of the right methods can and will improve your ability to concentrate in the future. Another profound insight is that focus can be contagious environmentally and socially. If you work in a space where other people are focused and working quietly, your mirror neuron system picks up on those cues, increasing your own likelihood of entering a focused state. This is why libraries, study halls, and certain cafes are often easier places to concentrate than your living room. Similarly, if you're part of a team or community that values deep work, you're more likely to adopt those values yourself. The social environment shapes not just our behavior, but our brain states. So curating your physical and social environment is not a luxury. It's a necessity for serious mental work. Internal motivation also plays a key role. While external rewards can drive behavior in the short term, sustainable focus is fueled by intrinsic interest. When you find genuine curiosity or personal meaning in your work, the brain produces dopamine in anticipation of progress. This makes the work feel less like a chore and more like an engaging challenge. One practical way to boost intrinsic motivation is to break your larger goals into smaller milestones that you can track and celebrate. Each milestone provides a little dopamine bump that reinforces the behavior loop, making it easier to return to the work again and again. It's essential to respect the limits of the system. The brain can't focus indefinitely, no matter how driven or passionate you are. There's a point of diminishing returns where fatigue sets in, mistakes increase, and the quality of thinking declines. This is not a sign of weakness. It's the biology of the system. Knowing when to stop is just as important as knowing when to start. Pushing beyond your limit regularly leads to burnout, which is much harder to recover from. Instead, operate in cycles of effort and recovery. Work hard, rest deeply, and repeat. This rhythm allows for sustainable, long-term progress without depleting the very resources you rely on to think, create, and solve. Sleep, as previously touched on, is the ultimate recovery tool. Deep sleep, particularly slow-wave and REM sleep, is when memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and synaptic homeostasis occur. If you're not sleeping enough, you're essentially working with a degraded operating system. No supplement, no productivity hack, no planner will overcome the deficits caused by chronic sleep deprivation. Prioritizing sleep is not optional for anyone serious about high-level work. It is the foundation. Focused work also benefits from a mindset of iteration rather than perfection. Perfectionism paralyzes focus because it directs attention away from progress and towards self-evaluation. This split attention reduces cognitive efficiency and increases stress. A better approach is iterative improvement. Get version 1 done, then revise. This aligns more closely with how the brain learns through trial, feedback, and refinement. Each round of effort builds on the last, and each session of focused work moves you a step closer to mastery. The emphasis is not on being perfect today, but on being better tomorrow. Finally, remember that focused work is not about doing more tasks in less time. It's about spending more time on the right tasks. It's about aligning your mental energy with your highest priorities. This is not just about career success, it's about fulfillment. Because when you are deeply engaged in something meaningful, you are not just productive, you are alive. You are using the full capacity of your mind in service of something you value. That's not just focus, that's purpose. And purpose, ultimately, is the deepest source of sustained attention we have. In sum, the ideal length of time for focused work isn't a rigid number. It's a balance between what your brain can sustain, what your goals demand, and how well you've structured your environment, behavior, and biology to support it. Most people find that working in cycles of 90 to 120 minutes with deliberate breaks maximizes both intensity and longevity. But beyond the numbers, what truly matters is consistency. Returning to that focused state day after day, refining your system, protecting your attention, and honoring the deeper purpose behind the work. Because focus is not just a tool for productivity, it's a gateway to mastery, meaning, and the fullest expression of your potential.